Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne, and welcome to Part 2, New York Stories, SOHO Part 2. So I finished the first part on the edge of SOHO, a little bit of my history of how I got down there. So it's 1969, I'm at Hunter College, and we get invited down to the party. I'm going to have to be at work at midnight, 9 o'clock. We head down to this area that I wasn't familiar with. So we get down there, and it's dark, it's late at night, it's 9:30 by now, 9:30 at night, dark, dreary neighborhood, not lit up well, 5-story buildings all around the place, not terribly clean. If anything, it's not clean. The whole place is sort of grungy, it's dirty, there's loading platforms all over the place, there's great big iron doors right and left. You look like you're in some medieval dungeon, some of these streets. And cobblestones, what look like cobblestones. They're not actually cobblestones. That's another little segue here. They're not actually but they look like cobblestone streets. A really strange neighborhood. So we're down there to the strange neighborhood. We find the address. We go into this building, and we have to get into this elevator to get up to the second or third floor where the party was going to be. But like I said, there's nobody there. The place is desolate. Most of Manhattan at 10 o'clock is not empty. Most of Manhattan, uptown, the village, all around. It's activity. There's stuff going on all over the place. Not in SOHO. Places deserted, except for a few people going to this party. So we go into the building, and we open up this big door, and there's one of those chain link kind of fences to get in, doors to get into the elevator. Big old grungy, dirty elevator with these chain link fence. The kind of elevator you see, I think Michael Douglas made a movie, The Perfect Murder, with Gwyneth Paltrow, who is having an affair with an artist at a loft in SOHO. It's that kind of elevator. I think Columbo in the early 70s did a show where the magician is in a loft like this in LA with one of these really rickety-crickety kind of elevators where you open the door like this, then you pull up this big door with a strap on it, to get in. We're in the elevator, going up. We get into the party, and it's 1969, and I'm used to drinking, and that's about all I've ever really done up till this point in my life. And I haven't done any other exotic drugs. Even marijuana was completely exotic for me at the time. Now, I don't know what I smoked, drank, or ingested, but within a short period of time, I was definitely paranoid and nervous and anxious and did not want to be there, did not trust anybody around me, did not feel good. There were revelers all there, a couple hundred people probably at this point. Great big, huge loft. A lot of people there. But whatever I took or had, I did not feel good about at all. And I struggled, literally struggled, to make it back to the elevator. It felt like a ride down to hell, getting out of the elevator, figuring out how to even get the door open and getting into the thing and going down to it and getting out on the street, back out on the street, and it's dark, it's dingy. I barely know north from south, east from west over there. And I probably walked a block or so and made it to Broadway, which is a little bit more familiar. Probably walked up a few blocks and tripped into a train station, made it uptown. And I think I got uptown. I believe I went to work that night. And I probably got to the phone company and crashed in the lounge for about an hour before the shift started at midnight. But that was my big experience in SOHO, and that's 1969. It's an interesting area because the loft and there was nothing else going on in this loft. It was just this big empty had been somebody's workshop, and like I said, factory areas, carpeted everything, but nobody was in any of these lofts as it turned out. And this is where it gets a little bit of a rabbit hole of information. There's two stories going around. Robert Moses wanted to put a thruway across Manhattan. Let's go to this map back over here. Robert Moses wanted to put a thruway to connect the interstate in Jersey, I-78, over here to I-78 in Brooklyn, and then to go up to Queens, to get up to the Bronx, to get up to New England. So Robert Moses wanted to put a thruway across Lower Manhattan, across SOHO. He wanted to come out of the Holland Tunnel over here and go right through SOHO, Little Italy, a little bit of Chinatown, across here, and then up to the Williamsburg Bridge and down to the Manhattan Bridge, which would bring you into Brooklyn. This would bring you into the southern end of Brooklyn to get out towards Kennedy Airport, which wasn't Kennedy at the time. JFK, no, International Airport. And Williamsburg, which would then take you to the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway and take you up to Queens. So he's going to put a thruway. He wanted to put a 10-lane thruway through this whole area. Well, Robert Moses never met a neighborhood he didn't want to destroy, other than where the Richie Riches were. If he could make money for his real estate friends and his architecture friends and his building friends, he would. Now, prior to this, Robert Moses wanted to he wanted to cut through, go back to here, he wanted to come down on Fifth Avenue. Fifth Avenue, in Greenwich, right where the GV is over here, is where Washington Square Park is. New York University is all around Washington Square Park. Well, Moses wanted, so Washington Square Park, he wanted to run right through Washington Square Park and extend Fifth Avenue, knock down the Arc de Triomphe that's over there, knock down the park in the middle over there, and he wanted to bulldoze Greenwich Village, which he felt was a slum. Robert Moses felt Greenwich Village was a slum. Now, this thing started for him quite a ways back. He first came on the scene in New York, I believe in the 30s, and he started, I think it was in 1941, when he first started and wanted to put this roadway through Greenwich Village. And right about that time, Jane Jacobs had moved to New York. Jane Jacobs was, let me show you her picture. Let me get her picture up here for a second. We'll see if it comes up. Jane Jacobs was a marvelous woman. She's one of my major heroes from the 20th century. There's two women that were my big heroes from the 20th century. Jane Jacobs is one, and Anna Hunt was the other. There it is. All right, let's see if we can get this up. And I'll put it up on the full screen for a second. And this was from I believe this was a New Yorker article from a while ago. And I'll put it on the side there. We'll move it up to the side so it's not on the whole screen. Okay, that's what Jane Jacobs looked like. Probably by the 80s or something, she might have looked like that. She was she did urban studies, sociology, and economics. And she was a journalist and a writer. She came out of Pennsylvania. She writes an article for a magazine in Pennsylvania going against the establishment and talking about what's going on in one of these neighborhoods there. Well, it's a really well-written article that's very definitive, and it gains her a little bit of prominence. She's in New York now. She gets bumped up to the next magazine and does a similar expose type of story where she gains prominence again, going up against the establishment and gaining some journalistic creds. She has quite an eye for the city. She's living in Greenwich Village, and Greenwich Village to her is this really nice, like a European town. Well, Robert Moses wants to put this thruway right through the middle of her town. Wants to extend Fifth Avenue, get rid of the park, bulldoze the slum of Greenwich Village, right? So she starts her political fight against Robert Moses back in the 50s, and she is successful in stopping him from doing this. Totally successful. They stopped Robert Moses. It never happened. And that's why Greenwich Village is still Greenwich Village. If it wasn't for Jane Jacobs, it would have been destroyed back in the 50s. Well, as far as this thruway goes, and it's called the, I'll get rid of Jane's picture right now. Let me see, back to here, over there, okay. they called it the Lower Manhattan Expressway. So Robert Moses, and this started in 1941, where they were going to put this Lower Manhattan Expressway across this whole section of town. Well, World War II came along, and that sort of put things on the hold for a while. So Robert got involved with a few other disastrous projects around New York, and they didn't pick it back up again until, I think it's 1959. So in 1959, Robert Moses picks up the project again. Robert Wagner is the mayor of New York, and the two of them are together like this about this project. They literally are going to bulldoze their way across this whole section of town with a 10-lane above ground throughway right across SOHO, get rid of all that industrial area, maybe get rid of parts of the Little Italy. That's a slum over there. Chinatown, oh my God, who needs that? We'll get rid of that too. We'll just bulldoze the whole bloody thing out. Robert Moses never met a middle class or a lower middle class neighborhood that he didn't want to bulldoze under the emphasis called slum clearance. He called it urban renewal or slum clearance, literally. Robert Moses is probably responsible for more of the crime in Manhattan than anybody else. He was always in favor of putting these tall projects up. And in the South Bronx, they put the Cross Bronx Expressway there, which completely destroyed this neighborhood. In fact, if you watch the movie The Bonfires of the Vanities, Tom Hanks winds up making a wrong turn going from LaGuardia Airport to his apartment on Fifth Avenue. He winds up in the South Bronx off the Cross Bronx Expressway, and that's where his troubles start. Well, once you take a neighborhood with people that are living in it, and they have a relationship to everything, you throw a freeway through it, you really destroy neighborhoods like this, right and left. You can see it in Oakland today. The city of Oakland, there was a beautiful creek running through this whole central part of Oakland with parks on the side of it and lower buildings. They came along, I don't know how far back, bulldozed the whole thing down, put this stupid Thruway expansion right through it, completely wrecked the neighborhood, threw up a whole bunch of tenements. Robert Moses on steroids. You've seen it all over the country. So there he is. He wants to do that starting in '59. Well, Jane Jacobs now, she's already beaten Robert Moses once. She sees this starting. The neighbors don't want it. The residents that live in the area don't want it. In fact, there's 500 buildings in a 20-block area with hundreds of families living sort of around the area, including thousands of people living in Little Italy and Chinatown. Hundreds of buildings are in this, 500 buildings. 500 buildings in this 20-block area. Lots of families. They are the immediate people who don't want this thing built. And Jane Jacobs becomes their hero or their heroine, depending on your political correctness nowadays. And she indefatigably works to stop this for the next 10 years. Now, by 1969, at first, the people that were in these buildings didn't run out of them because they thought they got sort of said, well, don't worry about it, it's not going to happen tomorrow. So they didn't like run out over the next week or so, or the next year even or so, because everything like this takes a long time. And they were sort of told that, don't worry, it's not going to happen tomorrow, don't worry about it. But the people that were in these buildings that owned the factories, that had the lofts, that were doing the building work, they felt like they were going to get eminent domain out of these buildings. You generally don't win against the establishment in New York City anytime. So they started leaving the buildings, one after another, especially from 65, 66, 67, 68. By 69, the place is empty. There's nobody in any of these lofts. The factories are gone. They've moved to Brooklyn. They've moved to Long Island City. They've gone over to Hoboken and New Jersey. They've left the city. They've left. They're empty over there. Two things happened. There was a vote that took place, and this is where, like I said, the rabbit hole gets a little bit. If you have more information about this, let me know. If you Wikipedia it and you look on Google these stories, you'll find one story. Now, I used to have a book which I'm trying to get from the New York Historical Society. I've got calls in right now, which had a slightly different version. There was a vote taken in 1969, I'm aware of the fact that there was a vote taken. And it was 65% against having the Lower Manhattan Expressway and 35 for it. Slam dunk, it's not going to happen. So suddenly in 1969, right as I get invited to this party in this area, the whole place is empty. And it was like a vacuum. It started to suck up the artists who were bursting at the seams in Greenwich Village. Greenwich Village by the late 60s was starting to get overcrowded. It was getting more expensive. By the time Dylan had sang down at the Folk City and the Cafe Wa and all these different places, and Joan Baez had passed through, and all these other folk artists had passed through, Greenwich Village was getting more and more on the map, and the rents were going up, and a little bit of a slight gentrification was starting to happen. Well, the artists could hardly afford to be there anymore. The writers, the actors, they sort of stayed. They didn't need a big space. But the fine artists and the sculptors and the mason workers, they needed bigger spaces. And it was nothing like these lofts in SOHO. They literally, like a vacuum, just sucked them up. And from 1969 to 1973, they filled up these lofts. The name SOHO came about in 1962 when there was somebody that was working on one of the reports to talk about this neighborhood. And what they wanted to do, they wanted to separate it from Greenwich Village. So they didn't want to let people uptown think that they were going to bulldoze Greenwich Village or Little Italy or Chinatown. So they renamed this area SOHO, south of Houston. Who the heck knew what it was? Nobody knew what it was. So that's how it got named. It got named as part of a report in 1962 in order to obscure it from the rest of the city. Okay, we got 17 minutes. I'm going to leave it right there. That's the end of part 2. I'll do part 3. More than likely, there'll be 4 parts of this, and reach about 15 minutes. So the whole show is going to be about an hour. Peace, patience, persistence, and I'll see you. Hope to see you next time.